once you get to an institution, you get stripped down, like literally, I'm not just saying morally, right? You get stripped down, you have human beings that are, searching you while they're having a conversation about football last night. And you're there dehumanized, degraded in front of these folks, and that becomes normalized.
It's a new year, a time when we think about fresh starts, second chances, about becoming the person we want to be. But for some people, the past doesn't always let go so easily. Welcome to Dreaming Big, Working Hard. I'm David Alvarez. In the United States, over 75 million people are impacted by the criminal justice system. That's not just people who are incarcerated. That's their families, their kids, their communities. And when someone comes home after prison, the punishment doesn't just end. They face barriers to housing, to jobs, to education, to voting. The system that was supposed to rehabilitate them often sets them up to fail. But what happens when someone actually beats those odds? When they don't just survive, but they transform? Today, I'm sitting down with someone I've known for years, Beto Vasquez, who grew up in Barrio Logan, my home neighborhood. He was the youngest of 4 kids, raised by a single mom who worked 12-hour shifts. By 15, he was in a juvenile hall. And by his late 20s, he'd spent years cycling in and out of the state prison. Today, Dr. Alberto Vasquez directs STEM outreach for University of California, San Diego. The city proclaimed the day in his honor, and he's dedicating his life to helping others find that same path. We're going to talk about what it really takes to change your life, not the inspirational poster version, the real version. What the system gets wrong, what actually helps, and what it means to come home and stay. If you believe in second chances, subscribe to Dreaming Big, Working Hard. It helps us reach more people who need these conversations. Let's get into it. So it's really great to have you here, Beto. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Your story from where your beginnings to where you are today is really inspiring. And so just thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. So why don't we start with the beginning? You come from we come from the same community, and I think we're both really proud of being from our community. Tell me about your upbringing, your family dynamics, and your story, please.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, and you're familiarized with, Logan Heights wasn't always as vivacious as it is currently, right? It was a time where, it's kind of not the easiest neighborhoods or communities to navigate. I grew up I tell people it was a very normal household, right? There was dysfunction. There was, alcoholism from my dad's side, my biological father. There was domestic violence. And my neighborhood was a normal neighborhood, right? There was drugs and there was gangs and there was violence. And sometimes people chuckle, right? When I mention something like that. But it really does serve to kind of set the tone, right, for what we see as normal, or what's normalized to us. And for us growing up at that time, in the 80s and the early 90s in Barrio Logan, Logan Heights, there was, that was kind of the picture that you saw, is a lot of stuff happening, a lot of kids that had to look for other things to entertain themselves with. And so I was no exception. I was in a household with just a mom raising us, and a stepfather. And my mom worked at the shipyard most of the time, usually 12-hour days, which really left, for my siblings and I to kind of fend for ourselves. And so as the youngest of 4, to immigrant parents, school was impressed upon us. So we went to school, but when we got out of school, it was kind of like, okay, what are we going to do? So we were just a bunch of neighborhood kids that would hang out, some that would go on to do, exciting things, like yourself, and, some that were going to make other choices. And so, not surprisingly, I kind of followed suit and started down the path of just kind of getting involved with things I probably shouldn't have been getting involved with. And then ultimately that just became normalized as well. And I found myself kind of just, making not the best decisions growing up.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about that, but I think you present this in the right way. You were actually that was normal. That was typical. I mean, the statistics, and I haven't seen it recently, but 1% of kids from our neighborhood graduated high school, and like I think less had a college degree. So, I someone like me who did graduate high school and go to college and the traditional pathway is really the exception to the norm.
Absolutely.
It was more normal, the experience that you described. And even in households where you did have people who maybe were the exception, that still happened. That was normal. And I think I've thought ever since then, and a lot of people always ask me like, okay, so when that was the norm, what happened with you differently? And, it's taken me time to figure that out. But one of the things that I would say is that our community did care for each other, right? We were a community that families knew each other, cared for each other. And then just unfortunately, there were circumstances in life that the struggles were real and challenging. And I also think there was some trauma that occurred that we didn't even know about until later in life, which I want to talk to you about. But again, normal. You're absolutely right. That was what Logan Heights and Barrio Logan was like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there was a point in your life, I think, that you said you continued down that path, and I think you identified it in public settings. Certainly the age of 15 was sort of an important age. You want to talk about what happened around that time?
Yeah. So, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, and you touched on it already, right? It's like we're multifaceted, individuals, right? So for me to say, hey, just my environment was off, and this and that, that would only be partially true, right? Because, there was these dynamics at home, right? The lack of a presence of a father. I had a stepfather who's of a different culture, right? So he was, he's Arab. And the whole time growing up in a neighborhood like Logan Heights, it was like I seen the Arab people were at the liquor stores, right? And so there was a lot of cultural components that needed to be, filled out. And so one of them was kind of like even just, the proximity with which he would talk to me and how loud it would get, right? And kind of taking this combative stance, myself as a young person. So it was a little bit of that. It was a little bit of not having mom show up for things at school. It was a little bit of being the youngest, having to fend for myself to do things. So all those things kind of culminating together, naturally I sought out somewhere to feel validated and like I belonged, right? And I was a real good student in school. But the thing was, I started developing this attitude of, well, why should I care if nobody else cares? And so I think ultimately, all those things considered, it made it really easy for me. It was a great recipe, you could say, right, for me to start making more bad choices, start getting more in trouble, and then ended up having issues at home, right, where I was kicked out of my house, and then I ended up being homeless, legitimately homeless, right, not staying at my PI's house or anything. I didn't have no relatives, so it was, you could stay with your friends only for a couple of days, and then kind of just ended up, out and about. And so from there, that made it even all the more within reach for me, to make the stupid choices, illicit activity to try to, find ways to take care of myself, right? And so at 15, that's kind of what started happening is I really started getting in trouble and I started being introduced to the system as a juvenile.
You were in middle school at that time, or were you going to school even though you were not housed?
Yeah, so it's funny because I don't really talk about this too often, but we moved to Chula Vista for a little while. I went to Castle Park, got kicked out after the first semester because I had 180 something truancies, right? So I was literally never there. The only period that I went to was a 5th period social science class with Miss Allison, and I remember it specifically because she would always treat me with respect, right? Prior to that, the circumstances in school were always such that I was expected to do bad. And so I started to kind of accept that, right? And so I ended up getting kicked out from Castle Park, went to Palomar, which is a continuation school, got kicked out of there. And during the time that I was there, to kind of get back to your question, I was homeless. I had a sister that lived over there kind of, Southeast San Diego. And the only way I knew how to get to school was on the freeway. So I walked on one occasion on the freeway, on the side of the freeway to get to school, down in Chula Vista. And it was, I wanted to do school and do good for myself, but the circumstances didn't allow, didn't make that easy. And so I just ended up dropping out from school for a few years.
And so you drop out, and what do you spend your time doing?
What didn't I do? That was good, right? Because I didn't do a lot of, I wasn't being productive. I wasn't being a productive member of society. I would just say, I was finding other ways to keep myself busy, to put money in my pocket, and to meet my basic needs. And so a lot of those things I'm not too proud of, but it was definitely things that would get me in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what was the first time when you really realized, oh, I'm in trouble?
Probably the first time that I got locked up. When I got locked up as a juvenile, and I had so much anger, so much resentment from my mom. And I remember calling home and being like, "Hey, you got to come and get me out of here, right? Because, you don't provide for me. You don't this, you don't that." I was upset. And here I was in juvenile hall, right?
How old were you then?
I was 15, 16 years old. Yeah. And so it just kind of dawned on me like, wow, like here I am, right? This is where I'm at. This is real.
Yeah.
Because up to then you always, when you're young, you kind of think like, it's not, not me. Everybody else gets caught. I must be really good or really fast. Then you end up finding out that you're really not that fast.
It's a matter of time.
Because you get caught up.
Yeah. So after that experience at juvenile hall, how long were you there?
Juvenile was a short stint. I'd say about 3-4 months.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was
sorry to interrupt. Do you remember going through the criminal justice system to court and all that?
I do.
As a kid, what happens?
It was super duper frustrating. To add to that, it was the fact that I couldn't do it on my own. I needed to have my parent there. My parent, who I had animosity towards, who, at one point made me feel like there was no interest in me. It was all of that. It was having to feel like I needed that again, and it was kind of forced. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a good experience for me or for her, right? And to add to that, now as a parent, I think back, right, and I think, she was worried about making sure we were provided for, making sure we had a roof over our head, all those different things, and here I was adding this extra layer of cost and concern, right? And so it was. We would bump heads. The situation with my stepfather was still, robust. We weren't in the best of circumstances. And it was just the process, man. It's an arduous process of going back to the court, coming back, having to take care of, requirements that they have for you, having to do this, having to do that, having to make these payments, right, that you have to undergo. And for me, I was on house arrest. So it was even, I had to ask, I ended up staying at one of my mom's friend's house during my house arrest stint because I couldn't stay at home because, the circumstances there weren't great. And so,
and yet no one in the system figured out that was what you were going through.
Right.
Help support that.
Right. And so, I would get in trouble even on house arrest for raking the yard outside. And I'm like, oh, I'm staying in the house. I'm cleaning up the yard, trying to keep myself busy. Yeah. And they would kind of, slap your hand for that type of stuff too.
So that must be really traumatic in the, as a young person, but, you had a lot of experiences, but it wasn't traumatic enough, in your circumstance to say, I definitely don't want to, I don't want to risk it again. Right. Okay. Is that fair to say?
I think there was a little bit of that. But because we're multifaceted, right, and life was still happening, it made it easier for me to kind of succumb to those old behaviors and the things that I knew. And and you're young, and things that are important kind of are different, right, and maybe not the best choices, and so that it was a little bit of that too.
Yeah, there's a reason why research has demonstrated that brain development continues well into your 20s, and I think recently, not long ago, something came out that even into like your early 30s, you're not fully developed in terms of all of your connections, all of our connections. into our decision making.
I would say especially for guys, right?
You can see that in middle school and high school for sure. And so you went through after that experience. You said some of those things continued. What was the next sort of major incident in your pathway that occurred?
To the major, I mean, I tried to stay out of trouble for some time. I ended up graduating with Urban Corps of San Diego a couple of years later. As a matter of fact, I was on on uh, on on house arrest. I had the monitor still when I started at Urban Corps, and thankfully, I mean, I just like everybody else, I just wanted something normal, man. And normal, if I need to define that, at that point, it was just let me have just a regular job, 9 to 5, steady paycheck. Let me feel like I have purpose, right? And so that's all I sought out. And so Urban Corps helped me kind of stabilize with some of that. But I still played the fence. You know, I was still, I'm still young. I still want to do things. And I had to learn. It took me years to realize that I have a very addictive personality. And so I would find myself substituting one substance for another, or behaviors for another. And so, during that process, I was in the midst of all that, right? Like, I was trying to be slick and do this and do that. And so I was playing the fence, if I'm to be honest with you, right? I was trying to do good. Things still were not perfect. There was a lot of, there was life happening still. And so it was a lot easier to kind of follow this path that I had known where, really nobody told me what to do.
Along, this must have been early 90s, into the 90s era, I think is what we're referring to for you. Things have changed in the system, and, some things have not changed, but some things have, especially as it relates to young people in the criminal justice system. What, were there ever any things any programs or any offerings that you felt like Urban Corps was one good example, but like any other connection that was made for you to sort of try and feel like this is where I can belong, or address some of those other concerns that were perhaps keeping you on the fence?
Yeah, I don't recall that there was not many, not as many as there is today. Right. So today there is an abundance of programs to support folks doing all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, wow, this is cool. I wish I would have had that when I was a kid, but there really wasn't, man. It was kind of, they would send you to like these substance abuse programs, right? I'd show up, they would be really strict and mean. And, if I left for a break and came back and I was a minute late, 2 minutes late, they wouldn't let me come in. So then I'd be like, well, screw it, right? I'm not, why am I going to do this? I'm trying and it's not working out. And, obviously I'm not going to get it perfectly the first time around.
Right.
But it was very, there was a lot of consequences, right? It was kind of very black and white. There was no space. And I get why, right? Because then, because as an addict, right, we try to manipulate and maneuver situations. But it was, I like to see today that there's some mindfulness, right? Even with sharing, hey, we've learned that, folks don't develop quite yet, or, we know that there's, we need to take a multifaceted approach to things. Those types of conversations are great to hear now, because back then it was like, why can't you just fix it, right? Can you just get it right? And it was like, well, there's, it's a lot of things going on. It's not me just using or getting in trouble. It's, everything is kind of stacked up against me.
Yeah, that's right. So at some point, though, after going through all those trials and tribulations and experiences, you've realized, perhaps for me, this is a pathway that I can take, and this is the first step that I can take. And I know you've talked about fire camp, which I'd love for you to share. I think people don't really actually know what that is, but it's one of several programs that, as you said, are now embedded into some of the institutions. Besides that, or maybe just that, sort of, what was the turning point that once you had that last interaction with the system, that you started to really find your footing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big space between that, between the first time and the last time, right? There was, I mean, I donated. I'm gonna say I donated, most of my 20s to the California Department of Corrections. Prior to that, I had graduated, right? I went from juvenile hall to county jails and then state prisons, right? And and every time that I would kind of transition over to the new facilities, not the individual facilities, but the institution, if you will,
Mm.
it was a reminder of how disposable I've become, and that started to become normalized for me, right? And so, that's a whole process because one would say, well, why, you didn't get it together here, right? Did you see that things were going wrong? Didn't you want to do something different? I did. But you just like those other things became normalized. This has become normalized. I mean, if you think about it, David, right? Once you get to an institution, you get stripped down. Like literally, I'm not just saying morally, right? You get stripped down. You have human beings that are searching you while they're having a conversation about football last night, and you're there dehumanized, degraded in front of these folks, and that becomes normalized. And it's sad to say that, right? And so, think of all those years of being treated in a certain way. It takes a lot of grit
Mhm.
to rise above that, and that's not even taking into consideration the on within the inmate population and the politics there.
Dynamics there,
Yeah,
yeah.
the dynamics there, right? That's a whole nother beast. And so, so it takes a lot to be able to rise above that and say, you know what, I think I deserve something better for myself. For me, I would say though, it was experiencing these just incredible, not a good incredible, but incredible riots and situations in there that claimed lives on a couple of instances, and where I felt so powerless in that, up to then you're like, okay, I did the crime, I'll do the time, no problem, right, go home. Well, here we were where I had no control over anything anymore. And now, you know, lives were claimed. And just because of the color of my skin and who I hung out with in prison, I have to just sit there and stay quiet and get locked up, an ad tag, which is like a jail within the jail. During that time, I had a lot of time to reflect, right? So this is 23 hours in a cell. We're talking all day long. You see some other things back there. And I thought to myself, well, is this where I really want to see myself, right? And I think that's where it really kind of started changing for me is yeah, this is not what I signed up for, so to speak, right?
How old were you at that, roughly in that time?
That time I was kind of like early 20s already. I think about 23 where that's happening. And then, I had got out after this whole ordeal. And then still, again, things were changing, but not as, very gradually, not as quick as I would like. And then I picked up one more term because I was using and I, it's kind of some of the same behaviors, right? Like Anna's wasn't there as much, right? I was kind of tired of it already, but it's what I knew. And so that's where I was. And so on that last term that I went in, I was things were different, right? I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna, I'm not, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. And I really wanted to focus on what my plan was going to be when I got out this time, because I wanted to do something different. And so I was thankful that I got locked up that last time, because unfortunately that was the only place where I could stay clean and I could stay, clear-minded and I could come up with a plan for myself.
It's interesting, as you know, and I've shared with others. I've had some siblings who went through the system, and I've heard the phrase from personally from them, but also from other people who shared their stories about, I needed that experience, or that experience was important for me to realize, which there's a lot to that, but I also don't hope that people don't read that or take that the wrong way. I mean, we also need to talk about mass incarceration, which is essentially the reason you were there for using substances. This is just to be clear, the phrase gets thrown out a lot, and people who are know the lingo and the language of the criminal justice system and all that, know what we're referring to. But this is what we're referring to. It's when we're warehousing people just because they use drugs, when we know that there are ways to deal with those issues that don't require $130,000 a year of keeping someone behind bars. And perhaps as taxpayers, we should start thinking about, oh, is that really a good use of money, or could we spend, a quarter of that and give someone the support systems that they need to not fall back to that? But so it's an interesting, I want to transition the conversation to what happens after that you said that, because it's like the two things that are like, yes, a lot of people have said I needed that, but then also, mass incarceration and over incarceration for reasons that perhaps could be addressed differently. They kind of like, for me, as a policymaker, someone who like is trying to navigate all the decisions we make on how we implement laws related to criminal justice, like what's that balance? So I don't know if you got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, right? Because it is, while we want folks to be accountable, for their own actions, we also want our system to be accountable for its actions or inactions, right? And so there's, we're talking about 75 million people, I think, across the U.S., the last I had noted, where folks are involved with the criminal justice system. And that can mean that they're on probation or parole or any of those, any kind of interaction, right? And I think it was about 2 million of folks that are currently incarcerated, right? And so, that's the size of some countries, And so it's amazing, right, that we have that many folks. And to take into consideration that in California specifically, for a long time, we were the leader, right? Like, and I'm not proud to say that, but we were in the lead of housing the most people in state institutions, right? And it's wild. It's wild to think about that. But I would definitely agree that, and I kind of alluded to that earlier, right? There wasn't a lot of opportunities before. It was kind of like a punitive approach. You did the crime, you do the time, whatever it is that you're telling me that was partially at blame, whatever, own it. It's on you, right? The onus was on the individual. Well, if we don't have jobs to come home to, if our economy's not doing well, if I can't provide for my family because things are too expensive,
You expect.
I'm going to do what I need to do, right? I hate to say it like that, but that's kind of where we're at. And so it is definitely important for us to be better positioned to support folks that are returning home, because they're going to be our neighbors, like you mentioned, right? What kind of neighbors do we want? Do we want neighbors that are going to be productive, or neighbors that are just going to continue to cost us more and more money?
And for as many problems as we have in California, I would say I have been following, because of personal experience and just really interest in this issue over the last well over a decade, less incarceration. But what is more important, in my opinion, is recidivism is improved. Whereas we used to send, I don't have the exact number, but I remember it was in the 60% back in the 2000s of people who went into the system, prison, jail, went back in within, I think it was 3 years. The new numbers are well over 40%. So there's something happening that's correct. Now, some people who feel very strongly about this may say, well, the laws have changed and made it easier for people not to be incarcerated. But in fact, what we've seen is a tremendous shift in the investment and I would say, while not complete change in turnover of the thinking of the system, certainly a lot of people, you can talk about advocates, but also policymakers, decision makers who are thinking, this is not the best system if we're just literally cycling people in and out. Like, we should be doing something different. Can you talk to me about some of the experiences that you've witnessed, that you're a part of, that you've seen? Now that we've talked about getting there, now getting out and staying out is another story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I try to be fair, right, and just about things. And you have to applaud the efforts. Even with recent laws, right, that would mitigate what used to be a felony to a misdemeanor, the intent, right? The intention is there. Whether or not it works out, right, favorably, that's to be figured out. but the intent is there. And I think that's where we can start, right? And we applaud that effort of the willingness to try new things out, right? And I'm a science guy, so we experiment all the time. Some things work, some things don't. That's fine. I love that approach, but I have seen, a lot of individuals who take more than once, twice, three times, 6, 7 times till they get it. And then they do okay, right? And the other thing is that we have to understand that there's 3 main kind of buckets that you can say. One is currently incarcerated folks and their needs. Those are different. How do we prepare them for when they get out? The other ones are recently incarcerated, or they just kind of aren't in that transition. Immediate needs might be, where are they going to live? Is it a suitable place? Is it safe? Is it conducive to their well-being? And then the other one is formerly incarcerated, kind of like my category, right? I've been out for some time, but I still kind of have this monkey on my back, if you will. And so there's different sections that we need to look into, and different areas that we need to look into. And there's policy that we can use in any one of those areas, right? But we also need partners and collaborators along those places too.
Yeah, and that's a great phrase that you use, because I think that's the message really, is that we as a society would want to solve this problem, and that requires that collaboration and the thinking, and it's from government, but also from the community, nonprofit sector, providers of services, and institutions themselves, which, we had a first hearing, I don't know if it was ever, but definitely in a very long time, at a prison on education issues, because we know that the data shows that those who are, while still on the inside, taking education and actually getting bachelor's degrees in some cases, so that when they do leave, it actually gives them some other worth, hopefully a pathway to career. There's still other barriers, acknowledging that, but the data again shows there that those individuals typically don't come back, or they come back at a very, very low rate compared to someone who doesn't have that experience. So those are the things that I think we'd like to see more of in California. And again, it's not good enough that we're spending $130,000 to house someone. We only give $10,000 to a CSU student. So you could educate 13 individuals at the cost, and get them a bachelor's degree at the cost of incarcerating one person.
Absolutely.
And that's where I think our conversation needs to go. I want to definitely talk about where you are now. You are Dr. Vasquez now. You went back to college, you went back to school, college, pursued a PhD degree, and now you're running programs that are exposing more young people to the type of potential careers, primarily in the STEM fields, and that's the work that you do. Tell me about the decision to go to school and make that commitment. And I really am interested in your PhD journey as well.
Yeah, thank you for asking about that. It wasn't easy, right? So I found myself in my last prison term. I was at a fire camp, which you mentioned earlier. Risking our lives for $1 an hour, right, for the beautiful state of California, which was amazing. And while you're incarcerated, $1 an hour it was good money, right? I think now things have changed. They've increased that. They've made it so that folks that are coming back home
Just passed a law on it.
Yeah, from coming back home, from having that robust experience, and now are eligible for those types of jobs, which I think is amazing, right? Because folks want jobs. And so I went from there. I did my water treatment certification, because while you're at a fire camp, while you're a wildland firefighter within CDC, you live at different fire camps. And so they're usually pretty self-sustained. And so there's a water treatment component. I got my state certification in water treatment. I thought, well, when I get out, I could get myself a job. But I came quickly to realize that when I got home, that because of my felonies, I was not eligible for those jobs. Thankfully, during the time, I had somebody that was helping me out before I got out to get set up for college, for community college. And so they helped me fill out my financial aid and all that stuff. So when I got out, I was ready to go. And so I started off at San Diego City College. And I tell folks all the time, community college changed my life, right? Changed the trajectory of my life. I got there with the intention of just beefing up my state certification. And at some point, I'd be eligible for a job, with the city or something, a good job. And then that just kind of, blaze the path for everything that was to come after that. And because water treatment has a lot to do with math and science and chemicals and such, I ended up majoring as a biologist, right? And so I'm a biologist today. I ended up moving or transferring from City College to UC San Diego for my bachelor's, stuck around for my master's, and then ended up ultimately going to San Diego State for my doctoral degree in educational leadership for community colleges. And so it's not a PhD, it's an EDD.
Sorry.
And so, no. I wanted to share that because, it just, some folks are like, PhD is deep. It's all good. It's just as arduous of a journey, right? And because, again, we have these things called life, right, that are happening. I had to take care of kids, work multiple jobs simultaneously, be a full-time student, learning how to navigate that process. And as a first-gen college student, how challenging that could be, figuring that out, and then ultimately, thinking about what do I want to do, right? And as I'm in this, as I'm kind of navigating, an institution like UCSD, as I'm navigating San Diego State, as I'm navigating undergraduate and graduate work, I find myself oftentimes, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do. Am I doing it good enough? Am I just faking it till I make it? Do I have a place here? And so, all that just kind of overwhelms you. And that's what inspires me to continue to help the students that I get to help today, right? Because I remember that. I remember doing, even as recently as my dissertation, right? And going through that process and feeling like, oh, I'm supposed to know what I'm doing, right? I'm supposed to know how to figure all this out. And the truth of the matter is that, we're lifelong learners, where we're trying to figure out how to be a parent, how to be a good, son or a daughter, how to be a good employee and administrator, whatever it is that your roles are. Again, we're multifaceted individuals. Kind of like I describe it like a diamond with multiple facets, and that contributes to its worth. Mm-hmm. So do our facets contribute to ours.
Mm-hmm. I think education journeys, especially one like yours, and look, a PhD is just another name for a doctor. You still have to go through dissertation. You got to do your research. You got to present and defend it. So and in your case, you shared you are a parent, and you're a community member, and you're involved and you're active, and you have to work also to provide for the family. So it is not easy. It's something that's definitely needs to be acknowledged and certainly honored. But I think you're bringing up something that maybe isn't talked about. Definitely not among circles of people who are first gen, or if you have no one in your family, like now we know you, but like we don't have anybody else who's got a doctoral degree. Who do you ask about that, right? And like, who do you ask about, like, as you're saying, am I doing enough? Am I good enough? And it's just, I think people underestimate the significance of not having that network, if you will, of someone who you can just feel comfortable asking questions that you may think you should know the answer to, but you don't. And I think that's one of the challenges that our community faces. You look across the board, degrees, whether it's certificated, bachelor's, certainly advanced, PhDs, doctoral degrees. It's like what you're talking about. People don't maybe see themselves in those spaces. And so a lot of the work that you do, great with the UCSD program, with Create, where you see it out, you're actually out in the community, which kudos to UCSD. Look, it's an institution that I've known for a long time. They're in La Jolla in San Diego, and we would say they think they're an island on La Jolla. Programs like yours are actually out in the community. They're connecting with kids, and kids are seeing UCSD as, oh, that's something like that I know. You're also, like, you were involved with Nosotros, nonprofit work. Tell me about why you think it's important that people be involved in that way.
I would say, David, that it's one thing that I've learned is, or that I try to practice very intentionally, is to be genuine and authentic in where I show up and what I do. And I try to, constantly be thankful for the chance or the second chance, you should say, right? That God has provided me to do it again, and even from raising my two youngest kids and being a present father versus not being a present father for my oldest kids. And so it's just, we need to, because if we don't do it, who's going to do it for us, right? I mean, for far too long, the same conversations we're having today about the lack of representation in areas of science or this, that, or the other, it's the same conversations they've been having decades ago, right? And so, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, this is one of the fastest growing workforces, right? And so if we're getting back to the root of things, if folks don't have a fighting chance for, to live comfortably here in San Diego is really expensive. You know that. It's really expensive. Jobs aren't always paying exactly what they need to have a good living chance here in San Diego. So what are we going to do, right? And so, getting folks ready to think about themselves as suitable for jobs in technology, jobs in STEM related or tangentially, STEM related areas that pay well, that are going to be, up and coming jobs. That's where we need to be. And so I have the opportunity now, thanks to the opportunities I've been provided, to share that forward, right? And so I take that really serious. I don't believe by any chance that it just, it was just something that I did or something that I don't need to do, but I believe that I was provided the opportunity to have the second chance and that I need to use it wisely, right? And what does that mean? That means that I don't forget where I come from. That means that I address some of the inequities that I suffered with. That means that I use myself as a vehicle and as an agent of change whenever I can, right? Similar to the role that you take, right? And speaking for folks that would otherwise not have that voice and sitting at those tables where they're otherwise not going to be able to sit at and representing, right? And so I really pride myself in being a UCSD alum, and I'm really glad that you pointed that out, right? Because if there's one thing that I really pride myself in doing is making sure that I take UCSD to communities like Barrio Logan, to South Bay, to Southeast San Diego, and when people are waiting for UCSD and I show up, they're like, no, we're waiting for UCSD, and I'm like, I am UCSD, right? And so, oftentimes I start with the kids that I start to work with, and before they even know what I do or who I am, I ask them, well, what do you think I do, right? If you saw me walking down the street, what do you think my profession would be? And I hear it all, man. I hear mecánico, carpintero, taquero, right? Like I hear all these different roles, and I tell them, no, I'm a scientist, right? And you just kind of see the look on their face kind of change, and that's what we're up against. We're up against these young people, right? These young generations not seeing themselves in not either with the lack of potential or represented in these jobs and these careers that pay better, that are going to allow for them to unlock and get out of that cycle of poverty, cycle of generational issues, right? That have consumed them for so long. And so it's not until they see what they can be and they start learning how to enjoy things like math and science, right? Because we do it all the time. We just, it gets a little scary when we're in the classroom and we're getting a grade from somebody who maybe has lost the zeal for what they do.
Well, and it's as simple as someone should, and we'll provide links, but UCSD's programs that you're a part of, you've brought things like the science of a tortilla, to your point of like, we're doing it all the time. We just don't know that we're doing science or math, and bringing that connection back. And I've always said something you said, you got to see it to be it. Otherwise you can't, you just don't. I think it's hard for people to understand that unless you've been limited by your exposure and then later in life have seen everything that's out there, you just don't know what's out. We are pretty sheltered in a lot of our communities, and certainly where we were growing up. And so, and I want to talk about second chances. It's a new year now. Just at the end of the year, we had a conversation with Father Scott Santa Rosa from Our Lady Guadalupe, and he was connecting it to the Jesuit faith with Saint Ignatius, and how we all have second chances. whether you're a saint, whether it's you who were formerly incarcerated, but like we get second chances all the time in life and what happens in our world. And so to see that you've taken advantage of that second chance, I think it's an inspiration for everybody that we can do the same with whatever second chance we're given. And so I want to make sure we end by talking about if someone happens to be listening to this, who may need the second chance that you had, what would you say to them?
I tell students all the time that you gotta learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And what does that mean? That means, same way that we say no pain, no gain when we exercise, right? You need to rip that muscle to build that muscle. And so it's not until we continue to do things that cause us to feel uncomfortable that they're going to become normalized for us, right? Here I go again with the normalized word. It's so important for us to understand that it's something that has taken us a long time to learn is going to also take us a long time to unlearn. And so how do we do that? We replace it with new things that we're learning, right? We start focusing on growth rather than all these other things that we couldn't control. I think that's definitely one. The other big piece is that we gotta be merciful and graceful with ourselves. I think too often we hold ourselves, accountable. I mean, accountability is good. Don't get me wrong, but
Standard of perfection.
yeah, say we messed up. Yeah, okay, that's it, right? Like, let's keep it moving. You are not defined by your mistakes, and your past doesn't dictate your future, right? So what it was before doesn't have to be tomorrow. And so I think that's a very key thing. I've had the opportunity, since I've been out and started going to school, which, by the way, it was a new route for folks, right? Usually you go through a recovery program or what have you, and they're like, you got to go get a job, which is fine. I get it. You got to get a job. You got to maintain. You got to provide for yourself. But I was playing the long game, right? I was like, I want to go to school and think about a career and how I'm going to get paid doing different things later on. And at first that was kind of a weird concept for a lot of people. And then it was something that other people started to try. And I have another buddy of mine who's up at, I think he's at UC Riverside right now, working on his PhD, tatted back, doing great work. Where they're preparing people that are formerly incarcerated to leverage their experiences to mentor younger people, right? Amazing work. So there's a lot of talent that is in these facilities. It needs to be nurtured a little bit more. And so I think education is a great place to start for a lot of folks, especially if maybe their upbringing, high school K-12 education might have not been ideal. It's a good time to start over, and at the very least, give yourself something because it boosts your morale as you're trying to try new things out, and ultimately, it makes a difference, man. When you have degrees, you're less likely to be unemployable, and you're more likely to make more money, right? I will say one last thing about that is within your families, change is also different, right? And my wife hates when I share this, but when I got home the last time and I told my wife, I told her, hey, I think I want to go to school. She told me, why don't you get a job like a real man and provide for your kids, right? Hurtful words to hear, right? As I'm trying to get back home and do something different. She doesn't think that now. As a matter of fact, she's going to be graduating from San Diego State this fall, right? And so she's learned to see the value of acquiring this higher degree. But I mentioned that because sometimes, people are fearful of what they don't know. And if our families don't know, if our families don't have somebody that's completed a degree in higher education, doesn't have somebody that knows how to do FAFSA or anything like that, they're going to be fearful and they're going to stick to what they know, which is paycheck to paycheck, right? All the time. So I add that to say, you're going to have to stand out. You're going to have to be committed, and you're going to have to go get what it is that you deserve, right? And sometimes you're going to be fearful, and sometimes it's not going to be easy, and sometimes you're going to be scared. And sometimes you're going to have to learn how to have conversations with people that you don't know, so you can start to develop a circle of support that's going to have these new things in mind. What do they say in Spanish? Dime con quién te juntas y te eres
¿Quién eres?
quién eres, right? Birds of a feather flock together. That's loosely translated into English, right? But you know, you can tell a lot by who you're hanging out with, right? And you're going to learn a lot from who you're hanging out with. So find a new group of people to hang out with, so that you can grow.
Well, again, thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you so much for the work that you do now in the community. And, everybody's got dignity, everyone's got worth. And like you said, everyone's got value. Absolutely. And so whether you're someone who may have had a walk of life that are looking for a second chance out of the system, or maybe you're just struggling to figure out what to do next, you still got worth, you got value.
Absolutely.
And we hope that this year brings that to everybody. Best of luck in all of your endeavors this year. I know, we're always constantly challenging ourselves. That's a good thing to do. Our plates are very full, both you and I, but there's always more good work to do. And I look forward to seeing more from you. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it.
Beto, thank you. This conversation is going to stay with me, and I hope it stays with everyone here watching. Here's what I'm taking with me. We have all earned second chances. They're not handouts, they're investments. When someone like Beto transforms their life, it doesn't just change one person. It changes families, our communities, generations. His kids, his students, the people he mentors, the people he works with. The cycle actually ends. If you're watching or listening to this and you're struggling, if you're coming home from incarceration, if you're on a path that feels impossible to change, know this: it's never too late. Community college is out there and open for you. Support systems exist. People like Beto are proof that your past doesn't define your future. And if you're in a position to help as an employer, as a neighbor, as a voter, as a citizen, think about what you can do to open the door instead of closing the door. Think about what it takes for someone to rebuild when the system has broken them down. Think about what you would need. It's a new year, time for fresh starts, for resolutions, for believing that change is possible. If this conversation meant something to you, share it and subscribe to Dreaming Big, Working Hard so you don't have to miss what's ahead. I'm David Alvarez. Keep dreaming, keep working, and keep believing in second chances.